transition to the NFL because unlike in college football with Kirby Smart, we're seeing some of these coaches actually be retained year in and year out. A lot of fluctuation, a lot of instability, a lot of vacancies at the National Football League head coaching level. We just saw a spate of firings over the last 48 hours. Vic Fangio, cut by the Broncos. Brian Flores, fired by the Dolphins. We just saw Minnesota Vikings fire Mike Zimmer. Chicago Bears fire Matt Nagy. The Giants just yesterday fired Joe Judge after 2 seasons. 2 seasons. But here's what we know in the NFL, and here's what's becoming a much more prevalent theme, a much more consistent trend. Offenses win in the NFL, and more importantly, offenses give you second chances in the NFL. We're seeing the offensive coordinators, the head coaches that had once been offensive coordinators, those are the guys that are typically winning. That's been the consistency. The guys with the offensive backgrounds in the NFL are given a longer leash. That's just the fact over the last 5 years. The only exception to that has been either Bill Belichick or a defensive-minded coach that has an elite and gifted quarterback. We've seen that with the Buffalo Bills, Josh Allen and Sean McDermott being his head coach. He was a defensive coordinator for 8 seasons, and we've seen that in Seattle for the longest time with Russell Wilson, a gifted quarterback, with Pete Carroll, a defensive-minded head coach. Those are the only 2 true examples of teams that are or have been elite for long stretches, or at least two plus seasons, that are led by defensive head coaches with elite offensive quarterbacks. Those are the only 2 exceptions. And if you look at the last head coach winners of the Super Bowl over the last 5 years that are not named Bill Belichick, well, who do you have? Bruce Arians, just one, known as an offensive guru. Same could be said. In fact, I would say more of that can be said for Andy Reid, who won the Super Bowl prior to that, and even Doug Peterson, who was the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles when Nick Foles took over for Carson Wentz. Peterson's background is in offense. So that's why 4 out of the 5 head coaching vacancies, excluding the Jaguars, of the 5 teams that I've mentioned, 4 of those 5 corroborate that statement. Vic Fangio, 19 seasons as a defensive coordinator prior to landing the Broncos job. Mike Zimmer, 14 seasons as a defensive coordinator prior to landing the Minnesota Vikings head coaching gig. Joe Judge, 2 seasons as the head coach, but his background was as a special teams coordinator for years with the Patriots. At one point, he was coaching some of the linebackers, and he was kind of a defensive assistant before being promoted to to special team coordinator. That was his background. Now, Brian Flores, in fairness to Brian Flores, I think he's a really talented head coach, and it's evident in the fact that he's already getting the first crack at the Chicago Bears job. But Brian Flores, his background, linebackers coach, 8 seasons, kind of coaching up defenses with the Patriots before landing this Dolphins job. And in fairness to him, in 3 seasons, he goes 24-25, nearly helps lead the Dolphins to the postseason twice, with Tua Tagovailoa as his quarterback. And I think what we're seeing is that Tua's quarterback ceiling is a lot lower than we traditionally thought, not to mention you have to face Josh Allen and Bill Belichick 4 times a year in your own division. And this guy clearly is a great head coaching candidate. So this isn't an indictment against him, just it's the reality that, unfortunately, because he didn't have an elite quarterback to work with, being a defensive guy, he wasn't given as much runway. That's the reality. Now, Matt Nagy is the one exception. Matt Nagy is the one coach that came from the Andy Reid tree. He was a protege of Andy Reid. So he has an offensive background. He was an offensive coordinator. And in fairness to him, he was 34-32 in 4 years, led the Bears to 2 playoff appearances, was the coach of the year in 2019. So for him, it's a little bit different because he was actually winning. he was actually winning. So I think he can probably still land another job. But this is why, to me, the Chicago Bears should be the most coveted job of those five. Because let's break this down. Let's look at first the Denver Broncos. Great roster. I actually really like their special teams, their skilled players. But here's the problem. No direction at quarterback. And again, this is factoring in who you have right now. Obviously, if they make a trade for Aaron Rodgers, the outlook of this team changes completely. But as currently constructed, you're in the AFC West. You're facing the Chargers, the Raiders, the Chiefs 6 times a year. That sounds like a brutal schedule to have to inherit as a new coach and be expected to win and deliver. Yeah, no, I don't want any part of that. Then you shift to the Miami Dolphins. Well, I love their defense. It's a young, upcoming defense that has proven to be extremely potent. I really like what they have going defensively. I like Jalen Waddle. I like Devontae Parker and Mike Gesicki. But again, I think that the ceiling for Tua we're seeing is lower than we initially expected. And I think that that can really hamper anyone's ability to elevate this team. If Brian Flores got cut after 3 seasons with what he's been able to do, including 110 this year, I'm not sure that someone else is going to come in and drastically alter the course of this team. Then you go to the New York Giants. Well, their management is in flux. Do I really trust the direction that they're in? They just had their general manager formally resign. He was going to be formally fired if he didn't formally resign. So he's gone, and Daniel Jones clearly isn't the future. Is he terrible? I don't think he's terrible, but I think he's just pedestrian. I think he's just mediocre. Not to mention, right now, I think direction and organization and leadership is so important when it comes to these jobs. And if your owners aren't organized, that's going to trickle down to the head coach, and it's going to manifest in ways that you don't want it to. And I'm just concerned that the Giants, quite frankly, don't have their bleep together. I really just don't think that they have everything settled. I like some aspects. The positives for the Giants are it's a big market. They're in the NFC East, which is the easiest division in football. I like some of their skilled positions, and they have 2 top 7 picks this year. They have the 5th pick and the 7th pick in the draft. The problem is there isn't really a life-changing quarterback option right now, and they got to clean up the entire offensive line outside of Andrew Thomas. And 1 or 2 picks, it can help a lot. It can change a lot, but when one of those picks has to be directed towards a quarterback, not to mention their cap space is in shambles right now. They have one of the smallest cap spaces available right now in the NFL, so I don't really love that situation. And then finally, with the Minnesota Vikings, I just think the whole quarterback situation is a little sticky. As long as you have Kirk Cousins there, and he's not a bad quarterback, he's an above-average quarterback, but that's going to be reflected in your record. You're going to be straddling the 500 line as long as Kirk Cousins is your quarterback. I love Justin Jefferson. And again, if you can make a trade to swindle over Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers, maybe even a Jimmy Garoppolo onto the team, okay, now you pair him with Justin Jefferson. You have the 2 stud linebackers. You've got something there. But to me, the Chicago Bears seems like the best job right now if a coach can have their pick, because I'm extremely bullish on Justin Fields. I've always been bullish about him. I've always been a believer in him. I think that the confidence and his swagger will return. Obviously, this was a tough year because his offensive line was porous, but you clean up the offensive line a little bit, and they've got playmakers, Allen Robinson, Darnell Mooney, David Montgomery, so they have a run game. They have a really good defense. Their offensive line wasn't awful, so I think that they're capable of cleaning it up and perhaps trading to land some different guys. And you're in a manageable division. Yes, Aaron Rodgers is in there with the Packers, but outside of the Packers and Aaron Rodgers, it's kind of there for the taking. It's kind of there for the taking with the Lions and the Vikings. That's more than capable of winning. And I just love the ceiling. I love the upside of Justin Fields. You have that in place. So to me, the Chicago Bears seems like the best head coaching job if you can have your pick at this moment in time. That's just personally what I believe.